Okay, so we're gonna get going. I'm gonna record this so that I can put it on Google Classroom. Let me switch over to my slides. Okay, so just so you all know, I tried to really kind of condense and focus what I went over and make sure it was really closely tied to the objectives and closely tied to um, what questions were going to be asked. So we'll go ahead and kind of jump in. Alex, we'll let her get in here really quick. All right. Okay, so in terms of DNA, we've got our DNA, which is composed of genetic material. That genetic material is our instructions. So it's our instructions specifically for proteins, but proteins give us our characteristics, our traits, they do jobs in the body. Almost every job or function in the body is connected back to a protein. So our hair color, eye color, and skin color are all connected to a protein called melanin. And the presence of that particular protein, which is a pigment, can give us those color variations that we see in those three areas. So even though our DNA codes for proteins, those proteins are directly tied to the physical traits that we see and that you'll talk about more in DNA to protein, and then predict those physical traits in Punnett squares for the two other content assessments after this one. So in biology, we call this process the central dogma. So we'll talk about the structure of DNA today. I'm not going to talk about RNA very much. I'll mention it just a couple of quick places so that you know its relationship. But you'll look at RNA a lot more in DNA to protein. And then those proteins that are created give us the physical traits, which are the outcome of following the instructions on the DNA. So you'll see this, this central dogma come up a couple of different times, and not only in this focus area, but then a lot in DNA to protein, because that is the main focus for that focus area. So in terms of the structure of DNA, DNA is made up of what we call nucleotides. Those nucleotides are strung together. There's two separate strands, kind of like railroad tracks, running parallel with each other. On each side of the tracks, we've got these nucleotides, and the nucleotides are made up of three parts. So you have a phosphate here connected to a sugar. That phosphate and sugar make up what we call the backbone of the DNA. So it's on the outermost edge of the DNA. And then the connecting part in the middle, what connects the two sides together, would be the base. And that base is a nitrogen base. So it's made up of nitrogen, and there are four different types that I'll talk about. So when we say that DNA is made up of nucleotides, again, each nucleotide is these three components stuck together. And I'll kind of show you the different variations of that. So these nucleotides, again, run parallel, kind of like railroad tracks. And then those ties that go across the railroad tracks would be where the nitrogen bases are. But DNA itself isn't straight, it's twisted. So it's like taking that railroad track or that ladder, because we tend to call it a twisted ladder, and then twisting it so that it has this spiral shape. So the beige here is where we would find the sugar and the phosphate part of the nucleotide, this outer edge. And then these different color-coded pieces in the middle are where those nitrogen bases are. And you can see that the nitrogen base from one side, and here this is adenine, is connected with a nitrogen base on the other side, which in this case, this like light purple color is thymine. So how do we know about this? We know about this structure from a famous photograph called Photo 51, which was taken by Rosalind Franklin. I like to bring this up because she was a very famous female scientist who did not get credit for the work that she did at the time. Watson and Crick, who I mentioned back here, came up with the official structure. They used her photograph to help them figure out the structure. And honestly, they got most of the credit. They even got a Nobel Prize, and she was kind of left out of the credit, especially since she actually died not too long after that famous photograph was taken. So those nitrogen bases that are in the middle and are connecting come in 4 quote unquote flavors for DNA. You're going to notice that there are 5 here. This bottom one down here called uracil is only found in RNA. So mentioning it, but I'm going to kind of ignore it for right now. So those 2 flavors can be categorized into 2 categories. We've got purines, and the 2 purines are guanine and adenine. And then we've got pyrimidines, and those 2 pyrimidines are cytosine and thymine. You're going to notice probably the reason why they're broken into 2 categories. The pyrimidines have what we call single ring structures, and the purines have what we would call double ring structures. So in order to keep the width of the DNA equal, we're always going to pair a double ring with a single ring, so you've got 3 rings across, and it's a constant width all the time. So how do we pair them up? We pair them up using Chargaff's rule. So another researcher that studied the structure of DNA, specifically the chemical components, and figured out that the amount of cytosine found in a DNA was always tied to the amount of guanine. So those percentages or amounts of each nitrogen base always seem to be closely tied together. So he figured out that cytosine always pairs with guanine. And then he figured out that adenine always pairs with thymine in DNA, because those amounts, when he broke down the components of DNA, always seem to add up to equal amounts. So you don't usually see the full name written out. A lot of times we just use the first letter. So we'll say C and G go together and A and T go together. And so it looks like this. Here's our nucleotide. We've got our phosphate, our sugar, and our base. The bases are bonded across from each other. So here I've got a C with a G, and then below it an A with a T. These little dashed lines are hydrogen bonds that help to hold the bases together. Those hydrogen bonds are pretty weak because we want to be able to break them open when we have to be able to read the DNA. Okay. We package the DNA. It doesn't always stay loosely open here like we see it or picture it as the twisted ladder. It has to be able to fit into the nucleus, so we have to be able to condense it down. We do that by wrapping the DNA around these proteins called histones, and that wraps down and condenses into a coil and coils more and eventually forms what we can see under the microscope as a chromosome. So that's how we fit all of that DNA inside of a very, very tiny cell nucleus. We want it in the nucleus because we want to be able to protect it. That nuclear envelope provides an extra barrier, protecting the DNA from other parts of the cells and invaders that might get into the cell. So it's really critical that DNA fits inside that nucleus for protection. So quick little recap before we move on to kind of the last part of the third objective. Maybe pause, look back at your notes, see if you can think of the answers to these, and I'll give you about a minute and then we will go over them just to make sure you can answer each Okay, so hopefully as you've looked back at your notes, A is going to pair with T, so adenine with thymine. C should pair with G, so cytosine with guanine. Adenine with thymine, A and T, C and G. Our purines, okay, are going to be our double ring structure. That is going to be adenine and guanine. One way I remember that is because I use kind of this middle portion of the name. So purine doesn't have a Y, so I'm going to pick the 2 nitrogen bases that don't have Ys, which is adenine and guanine. If you spell them out, they don't have a Y. So that means our pyrimidines are our two bases that do have a Y, so thymine and cytosine. And then DNA wraps around histones, where are proteins, to form a chromosome. Anybody want to interject a question before we cover what would be the last objective? If anybody has a question or wants to unmute. Okay, all right, then we'll move on. So DNA replication is going to take place because every single cell that we make needs a copy of DNA, because it needs a copy of the instructions to follow so that it can behave and do its job within a multicellular organism. So how is that going to happen? I'm going to show an animation. I'm going to go ahead and mute it, and I'm just going to point out a couple of key events. First off, a lot of things you're going to see on the screen are not necessarily things that are going to be covered, but I just want to point out a couple of key points. So when we make a copy of DNA, we're going to open up the DNA strand. So we're going to unwind that DNA by breaking these hydrogen bonds in the middle to open it up, so that we can read the code within the DNA and build a new DNA strand. The way that we do that is by unzipping it like you can see here. And we're going to have a molecule called DNA polymerase that's going to travel down one side of the DNA and is going to read the letters there. So if there's an A, it's going to put a T. If there's a G, it's going to put a C. And it's going to build what it would call the complementary strand. This process is called semi-conservative replication because we conserve one side of the DNA. We keep one side that's the old strand, the original, and we build onto it a new side with a new copy of the DNA code. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other half of the original piece of DNA. We're going to read that one and make another copy on that side. So we get two new copies of DNA, half old DNA and half new DNA. There's going to be some proofreading involved too to try to make sure we catch any mistakes that might be made during the copying process, but we don't always catch every mistake. So that can lead to mutations in the DNA, which can have impacts later. Okay. So when we're reading the DNA, we're going to read a gene. A gene is just one piece of that DNA, so a series of those A's, G's, C's, and T's that we read to give us the code to make one protein. In biology, we have a saying, one gene, one protein. So each gene codes for one particular protein, and then the presence of that protein will give us our trait. So the gene's kind of like a recipe for how to make a protein. So how do we kind of go about doing that? Again, we bring back our central dogma. So we're going to read the DNA code. We read it by reading each of those bases. So again, those A's, G's, C's, and T's. We don't read it as a single base though. A single base is like one letter in the alphabet. So we don't read by reading only one letter, right? Mostly we group letters together to get words. So the same thing is true for reading the DNA. We're going to read it in groups of 3 bases. So like ATC would be 3 bases that would give me the code for one protein. And we call those 3 bases together a codon. So each one codon, or 3 nitrogen bases, gives me the code for one amino acid. I'm going to put thousands of amino acids together to build one single protein that I need to do a job in my cell or my body. How we go about doing that, all the particular steps is going to be covered in DNA to protein, the next focus area. So I'm not going to get into all the details. I'm just going to hit a couple highlights. The middle component is RNA. The reason why we use RNA is because it's our messenger. We don't want this DNA to leave the nucleus because it's safe and protected there and it's the master code. So instead of sending DNA out to tell ribosomes, which is where the protein production happens, how to make the protein, we take a copy, think of it as a photocopy or a picture of the DNA code for a particular protein in RNA form, and we send that out to tell the ribosome how to make the protein that we need. And again, the details of that will be covered in the next content assessment, the next focus area. But just to kind of give you a little bit of a sense of how that works, we're still going to have 3 bases, which equal a codon, which code for an amino acid. So that rule hasn't changed. That RNA is going to go out to a ribosome, and it's going to tell it how to make the protein. There can be some issues that come up though. So if for any reason something happens to the master code, the DNA code, or something happens to the RNA before it can get out there to tell it how to make the protein, we could get a mutation and our protein might not be made correctly. Some mutations are harmless. They don't really have a large impact. You wouldn't even know that there was a mutation in your DNA. There's no physical result. But some mutations can result in deadly genetic disorders. Some mutations can be beneficial. They can result in evolution occurring and traits becoming better than they were before for the environment that we're living in. So we kind of have all options when it comes to mutations, just depending on what is changed and what the outcome is. So that is it for the content. What I'm going to do is just stop sharing my screen and then open it up to any questions that you ladies might have.